So you're doing some 10 pulls on the current banner and you get 5-star Wanderer. Now day before yesterday, we did Wanderer's basic guide. So if you want to check that video out, do be sure to go check it out here. It's basically, we talk about how his skill works, how his burst works, how different elements work with his skill, things like that, some kind of beginner game stuff. This video is going to be much later game where we're going to talk about the best artifact sets, some great teams, and some good weapons. So first, we are going to do a recap on the Wanderer that we were using. Again, thank you, Soup, for allowing me to use footage of your Wanderer in my videos. So real quick before we do get into today's video, tomorrow, May 30th at 9 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, I'm starting a 24-hour live stream on YouTube and TikTok where I'm going to be live streaming for 24 hours. We're going to be playing Uwuwu, we're going to be playing Withering Waves, which I have henceforth started calling Uwuwu, which I kind of regret doing that now, but I'm dedicated to the bit. So we're going to be playing that. We're going to be doing some HSR. We're going to be doing some Genshin stuff, so do be sure to stop by during that stream. Flyboy is level 80 out of 80 with 16,000 HP roughly, about 1900 attack, EM 65. His crit split is 72.9 over 152.6 with 111 ER, and he does have an Anemo Goblet. With weapons, Solar Pearl R2 level 80, running 4-piece Shimenawa, which is going to be one of his best artifact sets, but we'll look at the individual stats and other artifacts later on. C0, talents 888. So we are now going to go show a team for Wanderer. This is going to kind of be like a good round team. So this is going to be a good kind of base level team for him. Also, this could be called a shielded team. The thing with Wanderer is that he is very susceptible to interruption, where if you're flying up in the air and you get hit, it will just knock him down. He'll be able to go back up, but then it will decrease your damaging time, right? So you have to be really careful with keeping him from taking damage, keeping him from being interrupted, because with the Shimenawa set, you want his normal discharge attack to be where you get all of his damage. So having somebody like Zhongli in there to give him a shield to where he's not going to be interrupted, he's not going to be knocked down, is phenomenal. It's a great way to go. Then of course we've got Benny for healing and buffing. Then we have Faruzan. Now Soup's Faruzan is level 20 and not C6. So in this particular team, Faruzan is going to be great. C6 Faruzan is going to be insanely good. In these teams, when we're talking about Faruzan, we are going to be assuming that it is C6 Faruzan with like Favonius Warbow and 4-piece Tenacity to allow Wanderer to do a ton of damage, right? So as you can see, as it's going on behind me, we are hitting roughly like 8k per normal attack, into the 11s, into like even some of the 20ks, depending on if we have buffs up, depending on if we have Faruzan's burst out, depending on if we have all of these different things and we're critting, right? Another team option, if you do not have Zhongli that is still shielded, is the always wonderful Layla, because in Layla we trust. So Layla and Faruzan are both on the banner. So if you've been doing pulls for Wanderer, there's a good chance that you have like C0 Faruzan and C0 Layla, if not extra constellations on them. So if you don't have Zhongli, you can put Layla in here and that would be really, really good. Just like we talked about in his basics guide, whenever you use Wanderer's skill, whatever element is swirled will give a bonus effect. If we swirl Pyro, we get an attack buff. If we swirl Cryo, we get a crit rate buff. So if you have Layla, you can invest more into crit damage and less into crit rate, because then you can just swirl the Cryo and get 20% crit rate across the board. So it does kind of open up the team a little bit more to getting, depending on what kind of element you want to swirl. You want an attack buff, swirl Benny on the initial use of his skill. If you want the crit rate buff, make sure to just swirl Layla, right? So you can get this in effect to where you can, do you want the crit rate? Do you want the attack? It does say that you can swirl 2. I could never get it to swirl 2. My timing was just wrong with Wanderer to get it to swirl the 2 on the initiation of the skill, but you can get both the attack buff and the crit rate buff at the same time if you're able to swirl both elements upon using his skill. So again, if you don't have Zhongli, Layla is going to be a great addition to this team. You can do 4-piece Tenacity on Layla using her skill and her burst. If you have C2 on Layla, it's going to be really, really good for Wanderer's normal attacks. So now we are going to look at the artifact sets and the individual stats that you want for Wanderer, right? So like I said, Soup's Wanderer is running 4-piece Shimenawa, which is going to increase his normal attack damage if you have 15 energy and then you use your skill. This is his second best artifact set. Can be his best set depending on substats. I believe it's going to come down to substats between like this and Pavilion. We'll touch on Pavilion in a little bit. So for the main stats and the substats, we're going to actually look at these artifacts on this Wanderer. So for the Flower, crit rate, attack percent, crit damage, flat attack. This is nearly perfect. Because we're using Shimenawa, we don't need a ton of energy recharge, right? We just need enough to get the 15 energy, so that way its 4-piece effect can take action. We mainly want crit damage, crit rate, and attack for Wanderer. So this is phenomenal. For the Plume, crit rate, attack percent, crit damage, that defense percent, if that had been flat per attack, that's getting a little bit nitpicky. Energy recharge there would have been okay, or EM. Like I said, we do want to get 15 energy, so that way the passive can trigger. For the Sands, attack percent is going to be the way to go. Crit rate, attack, HP percent, energy recharge. Flat attacks, okay. Having gotten crit damage on this would have made this much, much better. But like I said on the videos, we don't get to choose the substats of the artifact. Sometimes we just got to use what we got, right? Now, if you were wanting to use Swirl Wanderer, then you would probably be throwing up an EM Sands instead of an attack percent Sands. That's just something to keep in mind. That's only going to be in a Swirl team. That's not really going to be in a team where you're wanting Wanderer to do Anemo damage. So for Goblet, Anemo damage, of course, crit rate, attack percent, crit damage, flat HP, again, nearly perfect. That flat HP could have been something else, but we're not complaining on that. This is definitely the weakest piece. Crit damage, EM, defense, attack percent, HP. If any of that had been crit rate, the EM is fine. Flat attack, attack percent, like this is definitely the weakest one. That's because of the missing crit rate, which we can compensate for swirling the cryo, like I've been saying. So like I did say earlier, this is his second best artifact set. It's going to come down to substats as to whether or not it is actually his best artifact set, because with somebody like Farina, you actually have like a third artifact set that can be better depending on substats. So real quick, I do want to touch on Pavilion. Pavilion is quote unquote his best artifact set. Does give up Anemo damage. It is going to increase when charge attacks hit an opponent. The equipping character's normal attack speed will be increased by 10%. While normal charge attack plunging damage will have an increased damage. So this is by definition, by association, whatever you want to call it, his best artifact set. Shimenawa can very easily perform on equal grounds if you have good enough stats, good enough substats. And the third artifact set that we're going to talk about next, Marshmallow Hunter, can also outperform or perform just as well as Shem and Pavilion in a very, very specific circumstance. So if we swap Flyboy over to Marshmallow Hunter, he's going to have roughly the same attack, which is going to be good. His crit split is actually going to be much better because we've also swapped his weapon. Because of the 4-piece, getting crit rate up by 36% once your HP fluctuates, then we can actually get him up to 80 over 250 with the 3-piece set because we swapped him over to Kagura's Verity as his weapon. Again, we don't necessarily care about his energy recharge because we're going to be doing so much with just his normal and his charge attacks that this is really good. However, the caveat to this is we have to run Farina, right? Farina is one of the only ways that we can consistently trigger this passive. So in this, we're getting much closer to a hyper carry Wanderer. Having C6 Faruzan would be amazing. However, if you don't have C6 Faruzan or you're finding out that you're getting interrupted too much and you hate it, you can of course swap to Zhongli or Layla, preferably Zhongli over Layla. Because we don't necessarily need that crit rate anymore, right? But you can just try and swirl Pyro on the initiation of the skill to get the attack buff always. You can, as long as you can get your rotation down, then you should be able to do that. So in this, we are going to have Wanderer, Zhongli, because Soup doesn't have C6 Faruzan, Bennett and Farina. Now, Bennett and Farina are a phenomenal combo whenever it comes to buffing from Benny and Farina fanfare buffing. The only thing with this team, again, this is getting much, much closer to a hyper carry Wanderer, if not a hyper carry Wanderer right now, which you're going to see he's going to be doing a ton of damage in the background. behind me, 20,000 damage on his normal and his charge attacks, which is insane. Plus you have Farina's little minions hitting 20Ks in there, 10Ks, things like that. This is a very, very good kind of hyper carry Wanderer team, as long as we can keep him from being interrupted, which is why Zhongli is there. We're getting the attack buff, we're getting the attack buff from Benny, we're getting the buff from Farina Fanfare, we're getting Shred with Zhongli, we're getting a shield with Zhongli. Wanderer will be the one on field doing all of your damage in this team. C6 Faruzan over Zhongli. If you are fast enough to avoid being hit and you're not getting interrupted, C6 Faruzan is going to outperform Zhongli in this instance, because of how the crit animo damage and tenacity will work with C6 Faruzan. Now we're also going to touch on some weapons. Wanderer is using Kagura's Verity, which is going to be really, really good for him for the crit damage. This is for the Marshmallow Hunter set that we were using just a second ago. This can be very, very good for him. That's a ton of crit damage to throw onto Wanderer. You do, of course, have something like Solar Pearl, which we use in the basic guide, which gets up crit rate. It also increases his normal attack with his skill, and his skill with his normal attack. Kind of, they have a relationship going back and forth. So this can be good as well. This would allow you to invest in crit damage a ton. Having a weapon like this, it might make your need for swirling cryo on the use of his skill less important. Of course, you do have Lost Prayer to the Sacred Winds, which is also going to get up your crit rate. It's going to increase his movement speed as well, and then when in battle, it's going to be getting some elemental damage bonuses, which are going to be very, very good for Wanderer. He can definitely make use of this weapon as well. Then, of course, we do have something like the Widzith. Now, the Widzith, he can use the attack, he can use the elemental damage. The EM is all right, because it's not going to necessarily hurt. You're not going to want that if you could, having that kind of RNG in there. The attack and the elemental bonus, you can always use. The EM, unless you're swirling, the EM is not going to be as helpful. So if you are using Widzith, you need to kind of make sure that you have elements present to swirl, so that way Wanderer can still be doing damage whenever you get that part of the passive. So that is going to be it for this video. If you have any questions about Wanderers, about his artifacts, about his teams, do be sure to leave it down in the comments. Myself or somebody else will be sure to answer it, and I'll see you in the next one.